About a year ago, I learned how to frog to handstand. It was easily the hardest thing I'd ever learned how to do, considering I'd never tried hand balancing before, and at points I didn't even believe it was even possible. And yet somehow I got it. So it was extremely intimidating to start looking at what my next challenge would be, knowing it would be significantly more difficult. The skill I'd had in the back of my head from the very first time I'd attempted a handstand, the handstand push-up. In my mind, the handstand push-up is the show of total body control. You're perfectly balanced, overhead pressing your whole body weight, and you're upside down. No human being should be able to do this. The goal that I set out was to be able to perform 3 back-to-back handstand push-ups, with the criteria being that I had to go from head to floor, back to full handstand on each rep, and I had to hold the handstand on the last rep to prove that I could do it. Now, I've learned a few skills in the time since I started calisthenics, and I feel I've come a long way. But this represented such a huge jump in levels that I wasn't entirely sure I was ready for. And as those of you have seen my goals vlog for this year, you'll know that I dropped almost all skill work in the last couple of months of last year and focused almost exclusively on conditioning, just getting super strong at the basics. More so to help me mentally feel ready as much as physically feeling ready. In terms of how that related to the handstand push-up, one of the first things I did was to take to the rings, doing dips and push-ups. The idea being to build general pushing strength where the instability on rings would mimic the micro movements that we have when trying to hold ourselves steady in a handstand, firing those little muscles responsible for keeping us upright, but also getting me used to the tension that I'd need to put my connective tissue under. I also performed max holds of the basic handstand. Needless to say, being able to hold a handstand for longer durations would help in my efforts to handstand push-up. And of course the pike and advanced pike push-up that I was looking to get to a high enough capacity that I'd one day eventually be able to take it to chest to wall handstand push-ups. Day one, as always, started with an attempt at the skill I was looking to do, an attempt at the handstand push-up, and here's how it went. This may look better than it actually felt, and the crux of the matter is I could only do the negative, which immediately told me that I wasn't strong enough, but I knew that already. What this really illustrated to me was that the eccentric, so the lowering phase of the movement, was such a challenge that I ended up falling far more forward than I ever expected to, almost like I was about to do a 90-degree handstand push-up instead. So building up enough strength to slowly lower myself down in a controlled way was almost going to be as important as having enough strength to concentrically push myself back up, which, me not being strong enough to do that in the context of the skills I've learned before, makes a lot of sense. My training for the frog to handstand, being a form of bent arm pressing, will have helped a lot with the strength that can translate to the handstand push-up. But a frog to handstand is still only half a rep of the handstand push-up, and at this point, it still represented a 1 rep max effort for me. So I attacked the chest to wall handstand push-up, the exercise I'd been working so hard on being able to do multiple reps of, and it didn't actually take me that long to get to a point where I could do 6 reps against a wall, and eventually even add some reps of advanced chest to wall handstand push-ups where I introduced a deficit to increase the range of motion. On day 67, I got my first ever handstand push-up in free space. Then I made a silly mistake. A mistake made even more silly by the fact that I predicted this before I even set out this handstand push-up goal. I started having way too much fun attempting handstand push-ups in free space. To be clear, trying out new skills is important. It really helps with understanding what level your strength is at, but it really should be done while staying within the parameters of keeping productive. Again, it was extremely fun, but the way I was doing it left me with very little energy to build strength after my little playtime was over, to the point where I could barely even hold a basic handstand after my handstand push-up attempts. I didn't want the 3 weeks I'd spent doing this to be wasted though. So I used the footage to better understand what I was doing wrong despite having the strength to string together 6 handstand push-ups when placed against the wall. The most obvious thing that stood out to me was my body position, in that my back arched quite aggressively in my handstand push-up attempts. But to be honest, that didn't bother me too much. This was more a product of me trying to remain balanced throughout the movement, and I actually think is more symptomatic of what the real issue was, in that I was pushing backwards in my handstand push-up. When I attempted the handstand push-up, it really felt like I was falling deep into underbalance, and I really struggled to stop myself falling backwards while I was pushing up. On day 73, I established that if I was truly going to make my chest to wall handstand push-ups effective, I would need to lighten how much my feet rested on the wall throughout the rep. But this made the exercise far more difficult, so I swapped out reps for slow negatives, and while the movement may look similar, the difference was immediate. The DOMs in my shoulders the day after the first time I attempted this was really telling, and I knew I'd stumbled on a really great breakthrough here. At the same time as all of this, I doubled down in spending more of my efforts on handstand shapes during training. Not only did this scratch the itch of keeping my training fun, but I surmised by throwing in shapes, it would better help control my center of mass during handstand push-ups. This got me to a point where I could perform 2 consecutive handstand push-ups, which was a huge milestone for me. But even here I noticed I was wasting way too much energy at the bottom portion of the rep attempting to push back up, to the point where I had very little strength on that 3rd rep to hold it at the top. So I started adding isometrics to my training, focusing on that bottom position, again keeping the feet really light on the wall. And what this really helped with was control in that last few inches before my head touches the floor. Then on day 103, I did this. Are they the most beautiful reps? No, and there's still so much for me to learn and build off the back of this, but regardless, I'm over the moon. Less than 3 years ago, I couldn't even do an L-sit. I could barely string together a few pull-ups, and the idea of doing a handstand was a pipe dream, let alone a handstand push-up. I'm going to spend the next few months consolidating my handstand push-ups into quote-unquote better reps while I continue to work on my other goal for this year, the front lever. So if you want to check out how that goal is going and what I'm doing to keep that dream alive, then check out this video right here.